If you or someone you know has a story, encounter, or experience you would like to share with my viewers, please send it to my email at stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. Thank you. I saw the strangest animal I've ever seen when I went with my father to go visit his brother out in Montana this last year. My uncle has been held up in Montana for a very long time and knows all the best spots for hunting, hiking, exploring, off-roading, you name it. The plan was for us to go and crash out at his place for a week while he shows us cool stuff. I should say that I'm only 20 right now, so I was 19 when this happened. My dad is 51 and my uncle is 55. We all love the outdoors, and I was beyond excited for all the deep parts of the land we would get to enjoy. I've been very active in the outdoors since I was a kid, but my father does all the primary hunting, and I've just enjoyed tagging along on the side. My uncle lives just outside of a really small town. His place is right off a long gravel road that eventually connects to a highway. He's got a lot of wildlife around where he lives. It's absolutely beautiful. Let's see. This would have been closer to August, July, because I remember it was scorching outside, and we kept the house pretty cool. My uncle also had a fairly extensive weapons collection he had been busy putting together for years. The first night there went by pretty normal. Nothing really out of the ordinary had happened. We got up early the next morning and began our trek outwards into miles and miles of thick, dense forest. We saw quite a bit of cool stuff here and there along the way. My uncle showed us some cool spots where there really ain't much human traffic at all, except the occasional hunter here and there. This is where things got strange. Several times on this trek, which I will say lasted for about 6 hours in total, that first day felt like we were being watched at several times. It was a bizarre sensation. There would be areas where we would travel through the woods, and it would have gone entirely silent. It was creepy, but nothing ever happened. We never spoke of it either. We get back to his house later on in the day and relax. Again, it was a very hot day out, but I remember how good it felt just to cool down in his house. Afternoon became dusk real quick. My uncle has a large window right by where he was preparing us some of his meat for dinner, when he yells out, "What the hell is that thing?" My father and I sit up from reading and run to come look outside. It's dusk out, so it's pretty dark, but we see that there's still some light coming through, and that's giving us a little bit of visibility. We see this furry black shape to be what looks like creeping along my uncle's fence post. It was creepy as hell. I couldn't make out a ton of detail because it was dark out, but this thing was jet black. It was shaped just like a human, but with a dog-like head and was very furry. It was almost as tall as a human too, and walked on human-like legs. My uncle unholstered his pistol from his belt, runs out the front door screaming obscenities at this thing, thinking it's a person in a suit trying to sneak around. We run right after my uncle while still staying inside, and this thing freezes mid-step, looks over at my uncle, and we start to see these things' yellow, glowing eyes. Then it stands up all the way, and we realized it's been crouching down. My uncle panics and runs back inside the house and slams the door shut, and thoroughly locks it. We're all standing there, freaking out at what it is we just looked at. I run back over to the window by the kitchen, and don't see anything out there anymore. We closed any and all curtains, locked doors and windows, and kept weapons around where we could access them easily. Never had any issues the rest of the night. I don't know what kind of animal we looked at, but it didn't seem nefarious. It seemed to me like it was traveling from point A to point B, and my uncle, thinking it was a person, started screaming at it to get it off his property, and it just happened to look over at us. It never acted threatened or that it might pose any real danger. I did see a faint outline of its body, like I said, revealing what seems to be muscles. I could see that it had tufts of hair on top of its pointed ears, and a face that resembled closest to that of a Doberman Pinscher. Since the rest of the trip and my uncle's went on without any other issues, we didn't talk about it again, and it was never brought up. I never, or my father or my uncle, to my knowledge, never saw it again. Back in 2013, I decided to go on a little fishing adventure. Just myself and my dog. We're in Montana at the time, and this occurred in Sheep Creek. Sheep Creek is only a little bit away from White Sulphur Springs, the nearest town. Layout of the area ain't a whole lot to be excited about. Lots of water, lots and lots of pines surrounding. Basically, just lots of thick timber. I'm sitting there, fishing with my dog near me, and my dog starts acting crazy. Now, my dog normally doesn't just act up like this, so I thought something strange was going on. He starts barking like crazy and howling. I tell him, "Casper, pipe it." We had an all-white mixed breed dog. I think it was a German Shepherd mixed with Bloodhound, but I can't exactly remember the mix. Anyway, we called him Casper for it. He was a really gentle dog and practically never freaks out like he did, even with strangers around. I hear branches moving and rustling noises over to my left, and I look, and coming out of the thick timber is what looked to be something half wolf and half man. I can't think of a better way to explain it to you. It was only about 20 yards away. It was on two legs, but I got the impression it normally walked on all four. It also had a kind of monkey look to its face. It was odd. It had long stringy black hair with lots of silver and gray, especially around the chest area and the muzzle and other parts of its fur, like its shoulders. It stopped immediately when it looked up and saw me and my dog, and just turned around and went back into the woods casually. My dog was going ballistic the entire time. I don't know if my dog smelt this thing coming from a ways away or what. I never once smelled anything out of the ordinary, so of course I didn't notice. I didn't notice the woods changing in sound or hearing anything different. If that thing hadn't made the noise coming out of the woodline, I would have never noticed it, and it would have snuck right up on me. I should also mention that it was a little taller than I am. I'm about 6'3", and this thing seemed to be maybe closer to 7 to 7.5 feet tall. I was astonished, freaked out, and stunned all at the same time. I don't know animals like that could even exist. I never felt threatened though. Maybe by posting this story, others will be able to come forth with their very similar experiences as mine and can relate. I was taking a trip down to Orlando from Texas. To do this, you need to first hop on Interstate 10 and take that into Florida, heading eastbound. I was on the I-10, just me in the car, and it was around 9 p.m. at night. I had just stopped and had dinner, probably about an hour prior or so. Driving my little Kia Sentra, nothing fancy. I want to say it was right around the River Water Management area by the Blackwater River State Forest. It was close to that. I distinctly remember the signs. It's a 2-lane highway on both sides, and on my right side as I'm driving, my eye is caught by movement coming towards the road. This large shape, which is in just a few seconds I was able to make out was a large canine-like creature. I'd say about 8 feet tall, running really fast towards the highway. It hesitated for a quick second as it got to the road, and then jumped out across the highway. It happened so fast that I started to slam on my brakes in shock. I immediately noticed that its 2 front arms were tucked underneath its chest, and it had a weird shape to it, like its bones were completely disproportionate to its entire body. It had a longer muzzle and pointed ears, but its face looked odd, like some sort of weird experiment that went wrong. It was ugly. The first thought that had popped in my head was werewolf, but it had already cleared the road so fast and passed the other highway in the opposite direction. I started to tear up in fear, wondering if what I just saw was real. I know that area is really close to Louisiana, and I know they're the witchcraft capital, along with Pennsylvania. So I then thought that it was some sort of demon of some kind. Did I really even see what I did? I don't know if I'm the only one that saw that when I did. There were other cars on the road at the time, but I think I'm the only one that came close enough to actually having to slow down for it. Scares me to think about it to this day when that happened. Hi. First, I have to say that I love your channel. Well, my encounter takes place in Orcas Island, that's in Washington State. I live in Oklahoma and have never experienced anything like this at home. Went to Orcas Island for my stepbrother's wedding. Supposed to be a great time. I did enjoy this trip, up until my encounter. Okay, here goes my story. This place was beautiful. My first time going to it, and has gorgeous huge trees right by the ocean, and there are deer everywhere. Even driving down the road, the deer are eating grass and not afraid of people. I just couldn't believe how much I loved it here. The night of the wedding was great. We all had a fun time and were worn out from dancing and celebrating, but did not drink and don't use drugs, so I was sober and didn't imagine this, even though I wish I did. Going back to the place I was staying, kinda like a little cottage or condo, had a garden and apple trees and deer all around. I decided to step outside to this bench and smoke a cigarette, looking up at the beautiful shining bright stars in the sky, thinking, what a great night it was. But then I hear this cracking like branches breaking, and I am thinking it's going to be a deer, so I look over by these two apple trees where the sound is coming from, and it is very, very dark outside. Only the moon and stars are shining. I can only make out a dark, big shadow, so I walk a little closer, trying to see better. Mind you, I'm thinking it's a deer, and then I hear this low, very deep growl, and I freeze with fear, thinking what it is because it's no deer. And then I see this face that I will never forget. It looks like a dog or wolf face, and is massive with pointed ears and yellow eyes, and huge, big, sharp, very white teeth. And it's looking right at me, growling. It was all black, and what I could see of its body during this short time was muscles like a bodybuilder. I guess you could say I was frozen with fear. I wanted to move and run, but I couldn't. As I am standing there, looking at this creature, it takes a step towards me and starts growling more, lays its ears back on its head, and pulls its lip back, revealing even more huge sharp white teeth, kinda like a dog does when it's angry or going to attack. I come out of my fear trance and just ran for my life back to my room, which was not far, not knowing if this thing is chasing after me or if I will die, and I'm happy to say I didn't. I made it inside my room, slammed the door, locked all of the locks, although no door or amount of locks would have stopped this creature if it had really wanted to come after me, and didn't sleep all night. Was happy to be going home the next morning, so I didn't have to stay another night there and worry about future encounters with this, I guess, Dogman. I've heard your stories of others talk about their encounters, but until you actually have one and know this creature is real out there in the world, it's a whole other experience entirely, and wouldn't wish it on anyone because you can't unsee this or forget about it. So everyone, be careful out there. You never know when something might run into you, or you into it. Also, I didn't smell any strange smells like some people say. Just a lot of nightmares, and this happened September of 2019. Back in 2001, actually before 9/11 happened, I was interning for this tech job I would later get and was doing all sorts of random shifts. I tried to get as much time as possible to be able to work to get the experience I needed. For those who are curious, it was an advanced networking job working for a bigger well-known company, whose name I won't mention. This also happened north of Seattle, towards Bellingham. This is in Washington State, and if you are unfamiliar with Washington State, this part is the most northern town you can be at. In fact, you're literally right by the border to Canada. I had just gotten off one of my shifts this night. It was around spring. I want to say April or May. Still wet and cool, but not freezing anymore. Weather was pretty clear, too, that I can remember. I think it had rained heavily the night before, so things were still wet. The portion of road I was driving on as this happened was South Samish Way. It's a small road just south of Bellingham. I was heading northbound. For those that don't know, it's densely covered by thick woods on both sides of the road, especially in the summer. It being in the spring, I remember the foliage had grown back quite a bit, but not quite all the way yet. There ain't no lights on this road either, so at night it's dark. At the time, I drove a black 1998 Ford F-150. It was my baby for a while before its tranny ended up dying years later. This thing could handle a lot of punishment. I've hit about 3 deer in that truck, and whatever it was I ran into that night. I'm driving down this road, and I'm doing the speed limit. Off to the right side of the road, bursting out of the brush, was this hyena dog-looking thing on all fours. It appeared so fast into the road, I ended up hitting it with my truck, unable to have enough time to swerve out of the way. As soon as I hit it with my truck, I hit it hard. It seemed to just move and glide off towards the left side of the road. I quickly stopped my truck, grabbed my flashlight out of the glove compartment, and hopped out real quick, just to make sure there were no damages. Keep in mind, I wasn't afraid of anything in this moment. I just thought I had seen and hit some very strange looking animal. I got out and checked, and there didn't seem to be any visible damage to the front grille of the vehicle. I thought this was really odd, because even in the past when I had hit deer, there were always marks, dents, fur, blood, and other marks obvious that I hit something. This time, it looked like I hadn't hit anything. I started freaking out, thinking I was hallucinating, inspecting the grill further, when I began to hear a low growl off in the direction of the woods this thing leapt off into. Never do you hit something as big as what I hit and not have any damage. I stood up so fast and bolted back into my truck, locking the door and throwing my car into drive. I just couldn't believe what I was experiencing. I don't know if it had planned to attack me or would I had not gotten back in my truck, but I wasn't going to waste any time trying to find out. As a child, I remember playing around a lot in the Cohutta Wilderness of Georgia. It's such a lush, beautiful place. Lots of animals, wildlife, plants, and places and things to see and explore. See, I lived remotely close to this wilderness. In fact, I think I only really lived a couple of blocks away. There was one time I encountered an actual werewolf-like being in the woods. I can recall it pretty vividly, in fact. I was about 10 years old at the time. This would have been years ago, but I think it was closer to the fall. The leaves were just starting to change. The other thing I should make mention of is that the day prior, there was a huge thunderstorm that happened. Lots of lightning crashes, really heavy rain, very cold, dry wind, and lots of thunder. This went on for most of the night. The next day, things were wet, but the skies were partially overcast and clear at times. I think it was a small storm. The wind was heavy enough it almost took out a couple of small trees near our home. Going out the next morning to explore, there sure were lots of branches all over the place. I knew the wind had really done a number on the night before. I figured it might even be more fun to go venture into the woods like I normally like to do. Being a 10-year-old kid, I did venture far into the woods, but my version of far at the time was maybe only a couple of 100 yards at best. I had been working on building my own fort back there with fallen branches and other debris and things I could find to make somewhat of a structure. Since the wind the night before had ripped so many branches off the trees, this might have been a great opportunity to get my fort even more fortified. I spent some time getting back to my little fort spot. The storm had been rougher than I thought. There was way more debris than I ever expected there to be. I could tell it was a strong storm. I think even the aftermath was still lingering in the air, because the air felt thick and weird. I didn't know it at the time, but I would later recognize that feeling in the air as thick static. Once I got back to my fort area, I was ecstatic at all the brush I could muster up and add on to my continuously growing structure that I was building. I spent time gathering as many branches as I could, adding on to my fort. I think I was probably out there for a good half hour before I stopped as I was bending down to pick up a branch that I noticed it to be dead quiet. I wondered where the birds had gone and the sounds of animal life had gone to. I don't remember it being that quiet ever, but I just ignored it and continued to add on to my fort. I don't think it had even been 5 minutes when I hear this snorting, sniffling sound coming from behind me, not far away. I turned around, expecting to see a deer or something, and I see these intense eyes. It's the first thing I noticed. They had this ominous glow to them, like a very dull rusty red. The animal they were attached to was this Goliath of a creature, 8 to 9 feet tall, 500 plus pounds. I know this because I'm 6'1" and 230 pounds now. I'm a bigger guy, and this thing could have easily dwarfed me in size. It was standing on 2 legs, and it never broke its gaze with me. It just took a step forward, then another, and stopped. It had a long muzzle and tall pointed ears. It stared at me for another couple of seconds and then bolted off into the woods to my right. I had urinated all over myself and ran back home. I was convinced what I just saw was a werewolf and I was done for. This thing was going to follow me back home and eat me, but it never did, and I did make it back home. I had to explain to my mom what happened and told her I couldn't hold in my piss anymore and relieved myself. She laughed and wondered why I didn't just go outside, since I was in the woods alone. I had to make something up. I knew she would never believe me if I told her what I saw. My mother was very critical of those things anyway, and to this day, she still is that way. Being a 10-year-old kid, I didn't have any weapons on me, and I'm sure as shit I knew a stick of any kind was not going to be doing any saving for anyone. I did end up telling some of my close friends, and they asked me if it was somebody dressed up in a costume or a mask. There's no way. It looked way too real. It acted real, it moved real. There's just no way it was a hallucination, or that I made it up in my head. It scared me shitless. It was so surreal. Had I been an adult when this happened, I would have been packing a Glock 40 with me, and had enough to hopefully ward it off. Although I don't really know if a Glock 40 would even put dents in that thing. I know there are things in this world we can't explain, and I'm not saying it was a Dogman, but I don't know what other conclusion to come to. I've spent so much of my life running from this thing, and trying to forget about it, but I can't. I feel like my best bet now is to tell my story, in hopes others will listen. At least the ones who have had similar encounters as I have shared feelings. I still wonder if it ever perceived me as a threat, and maybe that's why it just checked me out and then bolted off into the woods. Could I have been an easy meal? There was no one else around, and I was a small, scrawny kid. I'm not sure why something that big wouldn't strike me. Also, I should let you know that the closest I can relate this creature to was Stephen King's movie Silver Bullet. It looked very similar to that werewolf in that movie. In fact, eerily similar. Anyway, thanks so much. Thank you for reading. Sharing this helps me so much, and I'm sure so many of your viewers. I've lived in the South for a very long time. Closer to Louisiana actually, but I'm not going to reveal my actual location, or state for that matter. I prefer matters to stay private, at least as private as I can make them. Anyway, we moved there when I was younger and still with my parents. I was in high school at the time. My father ended up taking a great job out here, and we've loved it ever since. I'm a huge avid fan of the outdoors, and I love to fish. I have ever since I was young. In fact, that was always one of my favorite things about the South. It seemed like you had way more opportunities for hunting and fishing, but, of course, I could be wrong. For the longest time, I didn't believe in any of that nonsense that so many subscribe to. Bigfoot. I thought it was all a bunch of crap, a deliberate hoax to fool stupid people. However, I was wrong. Not only was I wrong about things like Bigfoot, it wasn't even a Bigfoot that I saw. I saw something else entirely. Because of this, I now believe in things that do go bump in the night, and there's more out there than we know. Whatever these creatures are, they are very real and very dangerous. When we first moved in, we didn't have a house or a place to really stay right away, since we moved out from the West. My dad's new boss owned a few properties and at the time was gracious enough to offer my dad one of the houses to live in for the time being, with a small fee for rent. I was thankful for this, and my dad was such an asset to the company he was working for, so this was a great favor that they blessed our family with. This house was a smaller house, but it was tucked away in the woods and swampland. My dad getting to and from work wasn't terrible. We had a long dirt road that led up to our house, while it was more like a driveway, onto the main road. For me at the time, I had to walk a little bit down our dirt road onto the main road just to catch the bus to school. Again, I was 16 at the time and in high school. And because the school I attended was further away than I would have liked to, I had to get up very early in the morning. This morning, I got up, did my usual routine, everything I needed to, and then was off to school. I remember it was still dark out. I want to say about 6:45 a.m. if I remember. I'm walking down our dirt driveway, and I'm using this small flashlight that I have because it's so dark that I can't see that well, just to make it to the bus stop. There wasn't really any streetlights or anything out this far or around the area. I'm about to make it down to the end of our long driveway and turn to start walking down towards the end of the small 2-lane road to reach my bus stop. As this is going on, I get a very disturbing sensation. I feel like I'm being followed. There's swampland and thick forests all around me, and I was beginning to think I was about to get jumped. I picked up my pace a little quicker and figured that maybe, just maybe, if I made it to my bus stop, I would be safe. The bus doesn't get there for another 10 minutes. I figured I'd be safe in time. I made it about halfway to my bus stop. I could see it at the end of the road. Something, though, was approaching me from the thick swamp to my right. I began to pick up my pace even faster and noticed whatever was off to my right began to slow its pace and stop. Whatever it was couldn't have been more than 20 feet away at most. I quickly shined my flashlight over in that direction, hoping to stop my possible assailants from jumping me. I shined the light, and the first thing I noticed was these bright pair of yellow eyes staring me down from the same height off the ground as me. Fear took over me, and I fumbled and dropped my flashlight. I heard this creature make some sort of sound. It sounded like a mumble, or sounds like someone mumbling under its breath. I knew if I had to run back to my house, it would intercept me in the dirt driveway, and had no way to avoid it. I figured at this point my best option would be sprinting as hard as I could to the bus stop, where the road opens up just a bit more. I left my flashlight behind me, and I'm sprinting as fast as I can in the morning darkness towards the bus stop. As soon as I take off running, this thing picks its pace back up and is following me closely. I can hear its heavy footsteps behind me, not far away in the swamp. Not jumping out at me though. It kept pace with me and followed me to where I was going. It sounded like it was gaining on me though, waiting for the right moment to just reach out and grab me. I finally had reached my bus stop and kept going even further on as the road turned a sharp right. The thing following me was getting closer, like a light at the end of a tunnel, or some blessing in disguise. Some random car just happened to be driving in my oncoming direction, and I began frantically waving my arms for help. The car with its headlights shining right on me stops, and out steps an older man who asked me if I was okay and if I needed help. I told him there was somebody trying to attack me in the woods nearby, and I rushed over to where he was. The man looked deeply concerned, and he could see the panicked state that I was in. He asked if I would like to call the police, and I told him yes. I kept frantically looking back over to the swampy woods where I was hearing this thing gaining on me, but now I heard nothing. It was probably just standing there in the dark, watching me talk to this older man. waiting in the darkness. The older gentleman was kind enough to keep me company for another 10 minutes before the police had arrived. Right as the officer shows up, my bus arrives. I had to run over to my bus and explain that there was somebody waiting to attack me in the woods, and I needed help from the officer. The driver understood and left me there with the cop, who made me feel safe at the time. He took down my information and made a very small report. He even offered to drive me to school, and he did. I'll never forget, on the drive to my school, he told me in the past month he's gotten calls in this area about weird things going on. He didn't really elaborate on what that meant, but I didn't care to know. I didn't tell him I suspected some sort of creature stalking me, because he would have never believed me. But in hindsight, you never know. I returned home later that evening, and my parents got a call that night. Police investigated the area by my house and that whole neighborhood, and found no signs of tracks or anything out of the ordinary during the day while my parents were at work and I was in school. If I or they spotted anything weird, we should give them a call. You know, typical police officer mumbo-jumbo. I just told my parents about the almost attack, and again, didn't explain to them that I knew it wasn't a person, because they wouldn't have believed me. My dad had armed me with bear mace, and my mom a much stronger flashlight. You bet your sweet ass I was terrified every morning after that to go to my bus stop in the dark, until it started becoming lighter out. I never had a similar experience like that ever again. Still thinking about it haunts me to my core.